You want to know what it means to be a mental monster? I'll tell you right now, before any explanation. Being a mental monster means having a mind so solid and so whole that nobody can manipulate you. Nobody can break you. Nobody can use your weaknesses against you. And the reason is stranger than you think. It isn't because you hid your weaknesses from the world. It's because you stopped hiding them from yourself. Notice what just happened. The secret was handed to you in the first 10 seconds of this video. So the real question hasn't been asked yet. The question isn't what this means. It's how an ordinary man, living an ordinary life, changes the way he thinks and feels and acts until he becomes someone impossible to ban. One man spent his life investigating that question. He found the answer in the worst place imaginable, inside his own collapse. In 1913, Carl Gustav Jung was at the top, internationally respected Swiss psychiatrist, university lecturer, president of the World Psychoanalytic Association, the chosen heir of Sigmund Freud, the most influential man in psychology at the time. That year, he lost all of it. Jung had publicly broken with his mentor over central points of the theory, and he wrote it down without asking permission. The bill came fast. He lost the friendship. He lost the entire circle he had spent years building. He gave up the presidency. He walked away from his university post. Colleagues who had eaten dinner at his house stopped answering his letters, and the portrait they painted of him circulated through academic Europe for years. Mystic, traitor, probably insane. Then came the strangest period of his life. For almost 6 years, Jung spent his nights alone, confronting his own interior images and recording everything in a red-letter notebook. He was genuinely afraid he was losing his mind, and it was there at the bottom that he formulated the most uncomfortable idea in all his work. Jung found that inside every human being, there is a part the person refuses to recognize as their own. The impulses they judge unacceptable, the desires they find shameful, the ambition, the rage, the envy, the cowardice, everything that doesn't match the image they built of themselves. He gave that territory a name, the shadow. And the shadow has one merciless law. What a person refuses to see inside himself does not disappear. It only changes address. It starts running him from behind, without permission, without announcing itself. And he will call it bad luck, or fate, or just the way he is. Now pay attention, because here is the connection almost nobody makes. All manipulation works through the shadow. Nobody can control you through what you already know about yourself. They control you through what you deny. The flatterer finds the vanity you swear you don't have. The provoker finds the anger you claim you've outgrown. The guilt tripper finds the shame you've never examined. Blind spots are exposed buttons, and it only takes one observant person to find where they are, which is why the word monster has to be understood correctly right now, because almost everyone gets it wrong. The mental monster is not a cruel man, not someone who hurts for pleasure or treats life as a war against everyone. The monster is the one who had the courage to walk down into his own basement and look at what was taught there, who knows his own capacity to lie, to attack, to want, to envy, and who, precisely because he knows, is no longer run by any of it. A good man who is blind gets used. A good man who is conscious is untouchable. Jung said we don't become conscious by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And he added something almost nobody mentions. The shadow doesn't only hold what's ugly, it also holds everything you were never allowed to be. The firmness they called rudeness when you were a child. The ambition they called arrogance. The anger they called bad manners. Your shadow holds your garbage. It also holds your gold. The mental monster is built on 4 pillars, and none of them works alone. First, ruthless clarity, seeing reality and yourself without decoration. Second, mastery of your complexes, turning emotion into a resource instead of being driven by it. Third, governing the persona, consciously choosing which mask you wear instead of becoming the mask. Fourth, action without hesitation, executing when the moment to decide arrives. Each one demands something most people refuse to do, and the first demands the hardest thing of all, to stop lying to yourself. Because there's a lie almost everyone tells themselves every morning without noticing they're telling it. It's comfortable, it protects, and while it stands, none of the other three pillars hold. You probably already know what yours is. Most people live inside a fog, and the disturbing part is that the fog isn't stupidity, it's protection. The mind builds bearable versions of reality because the real version often costs too much to look at directly. It's an ancient mechanism, almost merciful. It just charges interest. So a man believes those friends will always be there. He believes that at work he'll be rewarded simply for being decent and hardworking. He believes love alone is enough to hold together a relationship that's been cracking for months and sending signals in every room of the house. Ruthless clarity has two directions, and most people only practice one. The first direction is outward, admitting that the person in your life delivers nothing but excuses and has for years, and the pattern has never once changed. Admitting the project isn't working before you sync with it. Facing a hard picture without decorating it with hope you manufactured yourself so you could sleep. That's already difficult. That's the easy half. The second direction is inward, and this is where Jung separates from everyone else, because he found that what you see out there is very often what you won't admit in here. He called it projection. Whatever gets rejected inside us doesn't vanish. It finds a face in the world, and when it finds one, you feel absolute certainty about that person. It doesn't feel like an opinion. It feels like an obvious fact. Here's the test, and it stings. Think of the person who irritates you most right now. Not the one who hurt you, the one whose name changes your mood in 2 seconds. Now answer honestly, what exactly is the trait you can't stand? Hold that word. Arrogance, fakeness, laziness, neediness, whatever it is. Now the question Jung would ask, where in my own life have I been exactly that, or wanted to be, and never allowed myself? The answer usually arrives too fast to be comfortable. This doesn't make the other person innocent. Sometimes they really are insufferable, but the disproportion of your reaction, the anger that's too big for the size of the event, that part is yours. That's information about you, not about them. And there's a simple question that exposes your blind spot every time. Think of the area of your life where you avoid doing the math, the money you don't add up at the end of the month, the conversation you've postponed for half a year, the number you don't want to see on the scale, the statement, the report, the message you won't open. The place you avoid looking is always, without exception, the place where reality is furthest from what you tell yourself. Start there, not because it's pleasant, but because that's where you're bleeding without noticing, and no wound closes while nobody examines it. And notice what happens when the fog lifts. You stop living deceived, and a man who isn't deceived can be controlled, because every manipulation rests on a lie the victim accepted first. The manipulator doesn't install a new illusion. He just finds one that was already there. When there's no illusion available, there's no handle to grab. But seeing the truth still isn't enough, because there's something inside you that can destroy in 3 seconds what clarity spent months building. Something that fires on its own without asking permission. And Jung didn't just describe it. He measured it in a laboratory with a stopwatch in his hand. Before he was the author the world knew, Jung was a young psychiatrist at a hospital outside Zurich, running an experiment that looked completely ordinary. He sat a person across from him and said a word. House, water, father, money. The person had to answer instantly with the first word that came to mind. Jung timed the reaction with a stopwatch and recorded the answers. Most of the time, the answer came back immediately, effortlessly, but on certain words, always specific to that individual, something strange happened. The reaction time stretched. The person stumbled, repeated the word, laughed for no reason, gave an absurd answer, or simply forgot what they had just said. Sometimes the breathing changed. Sometimes the skin reacted. It wasn't a choice. It was involuntary and measurable. Jung concluded that we carry charged emotional cores that operate autonomously. He called them complexes, old wounds, unfinished scenes, humiliations that were never digested, sitting there dormant until something touches them. When a complex fires, something important happens. You stop reacting to the present. You react to an old scene with the intensity that scene deserved, aimed at whoever happens to be standing in front of you. That's why some arguments carry rage far too large for the topic. The topic was never the topic. Now understand what that experiment actually proved. Your buttons exist, they're specific, and they can be located by anyone willing to watch you long enough. A good manipulator is, above all, a good observer of complexes. He doesn't need theory. He just notices which subject changes your tone of voice. And I need to dismantle the fake version of this pillar immediately, because the fake version is making people sick. The fake version says, feel nothing, become stone, kill what's alive in there, and you'll never be hurt again. That isn't mastery, that's repression. And Jung spent his life demonstrating that repression eliminates nothing. It shoves the material into the basement where it gains strength in the dark. The man who represses everything doesn't become invulnerable. He becomes explosive. He accumulates in silence, day after day, until it detonates at the worst possible moment, destroying in 20 minutes what took months to build. You've seen it happen. Maybe it was you. The mental monster is not a cold machine. He feels everything, sometimes more intensely than others. The difference is that between the stimulus and the reaction, there's a gap, and he lives in that gap. At work, someone provokes you in front of other people. The man run by his complex fires back immediately and leaves the room looking unhinged, while the provoker walks out looking calm. The mental monster listens, records, and answers later, at the moment the answer actually lands. He understood that the instant reaction was exactly what his opponent was waiting for. In a negotiation, the anxious man shows urgency to close, and urgency reads instantly as need. The man who recognizes his own anxiety holds the silence, lets the other side speak first, and gets better terms for identical work. In a hard conversation, the ordinary man begs, and begging communicates one thing with brutal clarity. I need you more than you need me. There's a single test to know whether you own an emotion or it owns you, and it doesn't allow cheating. Did I choose this behavior or did it happen to me? If it happened to you, someone can make it happen again whenever they want. And if it can be repeated, it can be controlled. Here's the detail almost nobody mentions. This mastery isn't built during the crisis. Nobody decides to stay calm in the middle of the explosion. You react the way you were trained to react. The real work happens on ordinary days. Sleeping, taking care of your body, closing what's been left open, not stockpiling resentment in silence, because stored resentment is raw material for a complex. An exhausted man with a pile of unresolved business has no emotional mastery. He just has a shorter fuse than he thinks, which brings us to a third territory, and it's neither out there nor in here. It's exactly in between, what other people see when they look at you. Jung borrowed a word from ancient theater, persona. The masked Greek actors wore so the audience could instantly recognize which character was speaking. Every one of us builds one. The competent professional, the reliable son, the agreeable person who who never causes problems. And here's the first thing almost all modern content gets wrong. The persona is not a defect. It's necessary. Nobody can function in society behaving identically in every context. You don't speak to a client the way you speak to your brother. That isn't fakeness, it's appropriateness. And Jung considered the total absence of persona a sign of immaturity, not courage. This pillar has two enemies, one at each extreme. The first is total identification with the mask, the man who became his job title, who doesn't know who he is outside the role, who loses the position and discovers there's nobody underneath. Jung noticed these people tend to collapse around midlife when the mask stops being enough and everything denied for decades comes back with interest. If you can't remember the last time you were fully yourself in front of another human being, that's your risk. The second enemy is the opposite extreme and is the error of our era. Believing authenticity means total exposure, that showing everything you feel to anyone at any moment is proof of courage. It isn't. It's handing a complete map of your weaknesses to people you barely know. And notice how directly that contradicts the previous pillar. If your complexes are buttons and you publicly announce where they are, you've just installed a control panel on your forehead. Authenticity is not emotional nudity in front of any audience. It's a conscious decision about which part of you the world gets access to and when. Notice that this requires lying exactly 0 times. Is there someone in your life who deserves full access? Probably, and maybe 2 or 3. The error isn't having that circle. The error is having no circle at all and treating colleagues, acquaintances, and strangers with the transparency that should be reserved for people who've proven loyalty over years. In practice, at work, project steadiness, even when the resources aren't there yet, that isn't lying about numbers. It's refusing to let desperation lead the conversation, because desperation repels the exact allies who would bring what's missing. In relationships, hold your boundaries even when there's doubt inside. The doubt is yours and you examine it later, alone. The boundary is public and it has to be firm, because a boundary renegotiated every time stops being a boundary. In a crisis, keep your composure in front of the people who depend on you. People follow whoever transmits direction, not whoever transmits panic. You can fall apart later in the right place with the right person. And there's a line that has to be drawn clearly, because it separates this pillar from fraud. Fraud is a man who has nothing and pretends he has everything. Invented results, inflated titles, a facade with no building behind it. It fails. And the reason isn't moral, it's technical. Every advantage obtained by deception depends on the deception staying upright. You didn't win anything. You took on a debt. Every conversation has to be managed, every detail remembered, every story kept consistent. It's permanent, invisible labor, and it eats exactly the energy that should have been building something real. Governing the persona is the opposite. It's not inventing a man who doesn't exist. It's choosing which part of the man who does exist gets shown, and to whom. Done that way, your image stops being an accident and becomes armor. Others believe they know you. In reality, they see only what you chose to show. That's not deception. That's a perimeter. But there's a type of man who sees reality precisely, knows his own complexes, governs his image flawlessly, and still ends up exactly where he started. 10 years later, same place. He has 3 of the 4 pillars, and Jung had a specific name for what happens to him. He called it the provisional life. It is the life of someone who treats the present as a rehearsal. Nothing is final, nothing is committed to, everything is temporary. This job is just for now. This city is only until the real thing shows up. This relationship is only until I figure out what I actually want. That man isn't lazy. Often he's brilliant, full of plans and potential. He simply refuses to close doors because choosing means losing every other possibility, and he wants to keep them all open. The result is that he spends an entire life in a permanent state of the night before. Action without hesitation exists because the other three pillars alone are worth nothing. You can see reality with surgical precision, know every complex you carry, govern your image perfectly. But if you don't execute, all of it evaporates, and you've become a man who's extremely lucid about his own paralysis. There's a specific suffering that belongs to these people. They understand everything. They analyze everything. They explain with impressive precision why their life is stuck, and they don't move. Lucidity stops being an advantage and becomes torture because they can see clearly the life they could be living. Jung was blunt about this. He held that no self-knowledge has value if it doesn't turn into concrete life. Understanding your own machinery and staying exactly the same is just a sophisticated form of entertainment. You are not what you understand. You are what you repeatedly do. And there's a psychological reason for hesitation almost nobody sees. As long as you don't act, you remain the man who could have. As long as the project doesn't start, it stays perfect. As long as the conversation doesn't happen, you can still believe it would have gone well. Hesitation protects an internal image, and the image is too fragile to survive contact with reality. To act is to agree to be measured. That's why it hurts. Also, every postponed decision doesn't sit still waiting for you. It rots. The conversation you didn't have 6 months ago now takes 3 times the courage, because now it carries the weight of accumulated silence. The project you didn't start last year now has twice the competitors. Postponing isn't neutral. Postponing is choosing, without noticing, the more expensive version of the same problem. So do one thing before this video ends. Think of a specific decision you already know you need to make. It appeared in your head just now while I was talking. You didn't have to search for it. Notice one detail. You're not looking for information about it. You already have all the information you need, and you've had it for a long time. You don't need another video, another book, another opinion. What you're looking for is permission. And permission is not coming. Nobody's going to arrive and tell you it's safe now, that this is the right moment, that you're finally allowed to change your life. That authorization doesn't exist and never has, for anyone. Jung called the whole process individuation, becoming a whole person, not a good person, not an approved person, whole. Someone who knows his own light and his own darkness and doesn't have to hide either one from himself. So let me on to the misunderstanding the word monster carries, because it's a serious one. Being a mental monster doesn't mean being cruel. It doesn't mean stepping over people, betraying allies, or manipulating anyone who trusts you. It means being unbreakable in a world that constantly tries to break you. And there's an exact psychological reason for that, which has run through this entire video without being said outright. You cannot be manipulated through what you already know about yourself. The flatterer only works on the man who denies his vanity. The provoker only works on the man who denies his anger. The guilt tripper only works on the man who has never examined his shame. Every one of those handles exists only while it stays hidden from its owner. The man who has already walked down into his own basement has nothing that can be revealed against him. He knows what's down there. And notice, not one of the 4 pillars requires a victim. None of them depends on deceiving anyone or defeating anyone. All of them happen inside you, and they keep working even if you're completely alone. Let me remind you how that man's story ends. Jung was thrown out of the most influential circle in world psychology. He was called a mystic, unstable, a traitor. He lost his chair, his friends, and the position he'd spent years building. He spent nearly 6 years writing a book at night that nobody read, illustrating it by hand, keeping it private. After his death, That manuscript sat in a Swiss bank vault for decades and was only published in 2009, almost 50 years after he died. For half a century, the world judged Jung by a portrait painted by other people, without access to the document where he described himself. Today, words he created alone in that isolation are used every day all over the world by people who have never read a line of him. Shadow, projection, complex, introvert, extrovert. He was rejected by one room, and he was acquitted by time. Hold on to that, because it applies to you too. The verdict of one room is not the verdict of time. So start today and start small, because big decisions made on enthusiasm last about 3 days. Pick the area of your life you avoid looking at and look. Name the trait that irritates you most in someone else and ask where it lives in you. Do the math you've been postponing. Make the decision you already have all the information for. Each of those lays one stone in your foundation, and the foundation is the only thing nobody can take from you. Not the crisis, not the betrayal, not the person who left, not the job that ended. Everything else can be lost. A mind you built cannot. If this landed for you, hit the like button. It helps these ideas reach the people who need them today. And leave a comment, anonymously if you prefer. Which of the 4 pillars is hardest for you right now? Clarity, mastery of your complexes, governing your persona, or action? If you want to keep going deeper into Jung's psychology applied to modern life, subscribe and turn on notifications. Life doesn't reward the naive. It rewards the people who build a mind that can't be broken. The only question left is whether you have the courage to walk down into your own basement